And maybe they will not need you. It's not, because what are you uniting people for? Are you uniting people just to unite people, just to enjoy unity per se? Or are you uniting people for a specific political project? If so, you first have to define this project, or at least discuss it. If not, probably you should not have the final project at the starting point. Because the project will work itself out through the process of unity. But at least you have some. You need to have some idea of what your project should be in the process of forming this kind of unity. So in that sense, the story of the Left Front was a very sad one because it decomposed a few months after being started. But it was a very good lesson. And so 3 years later, two and a half years later, the process restarted again. For example, some of the people who were involved in the Left Front had it as a very bitter experience. So, for example, myself, I was very reluctant to be involved again in any attempt to organize and to unite groups before we had a very clear political perspective. But then it ended up that in some kind of new process of realignment, which is going on right now, we don't know how far it is going to proceed, but it is very much around the new labor movement. It's very much the left groups which are already involved in the labor movement, or with the labor movement, which are involved in solidarity campaigns, who sometimes work inside the unions. Sometimes some people are already even union leaders at the level of locals, and they're involved in doing media for the unions and so on and so on. So this time it's an attempt to bring together those people who are already oriented towards organized labor, who already share the same approach, and who thus more or less share the same politics. It doesn't mean they share exactly the same politics, but at least they share some basic political ideas of how to proceed and where to go. And in that sense, I think this is a very interesting and very important moment when we are facing the new president, we are facing the new stage in the global capitalist development, because the global capitalist crisis is in making, and we already feel it. And it's also the new beginning, the new starting point for the political left in Russia. So that makes us optimistic, as always.
There were a lot of parallels, but not the history of 1990s, but the difficulties of moving on have a lot of parallels to the struggles in North America, in both Canada and the U.S. So the floor is now open for questions to Boris. Go ahead. Take a few more.
Yeah, true.
Everyone had 3, so you've got 10 questions or something.
Okay, so speaking about what is capitalism, because actually it's much easier to say what is capitalism than to say what is socialism, by the way. Because I think capitalism is much easier to define, first of all, because we are based on something which already exists. So you can analytically characterize the phenomenon which is kind of available there empirically. And I think there are some very basic characteristics of capitalism which include, of course, private property, though very important private capitalist property, which is not just private property, but private property which is oriented towards employing labor. So this is the basic Marxist thing, capitalist mode of production. And also that involves, as a result, labor and capital markets, not just a market. Because of course liberals would prefer to speak about a market in general. But what is specific about capitalist market, which makes it different from all other historic examples of a market economy, is that it's labor and capital market. But you see, Stalin's definition of socialism was a purely negative definition. So he proved that Soviet society was not capitalist anymore, in the sense that they suppressed both capital and the labor market. They had a planned economy, and they suppressed private property. That means it was not capitalist. The problem, however, is that this negative definition didn't automatically produce any positive definition of socialism. Because if you look at what socialism was, at least as a project in Marx or even Lenin and Trotsky, you discover that there was something else. It was a society running itself, organizing itself, and running the economy according to its own democratic perspective, which evolves through democratic participation of all members of society. So in that sense, a nationalization of private property made sense because it empowered the society to become the subject of development rather than an object. So in that sense, positive definition of socialism was not achieved in the Soviet society. That's why we can continue talking and actually arguing what kind of society it was. Again, it's a $200 question. Okay, whether it was state capitalist or deformed workers' state or statocracy. And I enjoyed these debates myself when I was younger, but I do not participate in them anymore. Though I just remember one young comrade just recently complained that we stopped discussing these issues because I said, but the patient is dead. You know? So the object disappeared, and he said, so what? He said, so what? We didn't have enough of a debate. Не доспорили. You know, if anybody understands Russian, you'll get the flavor of this. Не доспорили. Just continue arguing. You know? Just continue. So, but anyhow, if we just get to the issue of Marxism and education. In terms of education, actually, the situation in the Soviet Union was pretty good. The Soviet Union was a very well-educated society. In fact, it was probably the most educated society in the world. Not even in Europe. I think the Soviet Union was a tremendously educated society.
Sorry, education? Just
yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I'm stressing. What you meant is probably political education.
That's it.
And of course, in that respect, the situation was pretty bad. It was actually appalling. But political education cannot be achieved without political participation. And in that sense, there was not the right place to get political education. So it was the wrong place for that. However, and now the situation is different because on the one hand, the quality of education is decaying quite dramatically. However, ironically, the level of political education is getting better because people are getting involved in different political groups. They're discussing politics, and actually, just recently, I published a book in Russian, which is not translated into English, which is called Marxism, not for educational purposes. Why not for educational purposes? Because they eliminated Marxism from sociology courses. You know, I have sociology students who don't study Marx. And then, all of a sudden, they discovered that after that elimination, students stopped understanding Max Weber as well or anything else. And then the Institute of Sociology reintroduced Marxism into the course, and they asked me to read the course. So that's basically the course which I read to these students. But anyhow, later it was produced by one publishing house, and they sell it as a social science bestseller, Marxism. So it's now becoming fashionable to read about Marx and so on. It's something prohibited, you know. It's something secret, you know, the secret knowledge which you don't get at the university or elsewhere. So you have to look for it. And, you know, these things make you especially excited, you know. So, speaking about workers, it's a different story. Of course, the level of political education of workers is very low, including workers' leaders, including trade union leaders. Now we're discussing forming some kind of educational system for labor leaders to give us some idea of